Hello, everyone, from a sunny morning in Cambridge in the UK. Welcome to today's webinar about developing reading skills for A2 Key for schools and B1 Preliminary for schools. And Chris will be introducing our new teacher guides to develop reading skills. My name is Kate Hansford, and I'm an exam support manager at Cambridge Assessment English. With me today is Chris Thorne. Chris is a teacher, teacher trainer, and writer who supports educators from around the world through online courses and his writing. In 2021, he's delivered teacher development programs in Japan and Rwanda, and is currently working with Cambridge University Press and the British Council on digital material projects in Turkey and Africa. While most of his time is currently spent behind a laptop in the UK, Chris has previously supported teachers and language learners while based in Vietnam, Malaysia, Australia, and Morocco. So let's get started. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much for the very kind and warm introduction there, Kate. And welcome to everyone. Welcome, teachers. Thank you for joining me on what is a very bright and sunny morning just outside of Cambridge in the UK. So we've got lots to cover today, so let's get straight into it. Today, we are going to kick off by looking at your teaching situation, thinking about your feelings and those of your learners as well, in terms of developing reading skills. We're going to look at some of the characteristics of good readers. What is it that they do that makes them good readers? We're going to connect those two bits by looking at some of the challenges, common challenges faced by teachers when helping learners develop their reading skills too. We are then going to spend the majority of today's session looking at some classroom reading activities. As Kate mentioned, we're going to be dipping into some new teacher guides to developing reading skills. We'll be experiencing some of those activities and trying to unpick them, seeing if we can take some ideas that we can apply to other areas of our teaching as well. Finally, we'll be showing you where you can find all of the teaching and learning resources explored during today's session, and there might be a smattering of top tips shared at the end as well. Now, we'll be taking frequent breaks for questions as we go along. If you're joining us today through the Zoom app, then there should be a Q&A button somewhere. So you can tap on that and ask questions as they come to you. But we'll also have some time to take your questions and discuss them at the end as well. Okay, so your first task is to share your situation. Now, a poll should appear on your screen very soon, and I'd like you to tell me which of those options are true for you. I think there are 5 statements in total, and I'd like to know which of those are true for you. If you'd like to share more information, you can add that to the chat. Now, if you are not joining us through the Zoom app, you may not see the poll. But don't worry, if that's the case for you, then please read the options appearing on your screen now. And again, you can tell us which of those are particularly true for you in the chat. So while you're doing that, I'm looking over to the poll. The results are jumping up and down as people are voting. And I can see that, oh, that's quite pleasing. We seem fairly unanimous. Just over or just under 90% of people don't feel that reading is a poor use of class time or that it takes too long. So that's great to hear. And the vast majority of people, just over 2/3 of us, feel quite positive about helping learners develop their reading skills. So that's really good to see as well. I'm just going to end the polling from the people who are participating in that. So I hope you can see the results on your screen now. Again, you can continue to share your ideas in the chat. Now, I should point out that I'm working from a couple of different screens, so if I occasionally appear to turn away from you, I'm just looking at the poll on my other screen. But yeah, as I said, it's good to see that the majority of people seem to really enjoy supporting their learners, working on their reading skills. The length of time spent that reading tasks take isn't seen as so much of a problem with the people on this session, on this call anyway, which is really, really good to hear. A number of people are conscious of the need to consider fast finishes, and maybe come up with some differentiation strategies for reading tasks in their classrooms. And it looks like one of the greatest challenges, certainly faced by the people here, is the issue of motivating learners, especially those who aren't so motivated to read in their first language. Okay, so thank you all very much for your contributions there. That's really helpful. That's a good way of getting things started. So those results that we see there kind of reflect some common challenges faced by teachers when working with learners on their reading. So a big one faced by many teachers is making time for reading. There's often lots of pressure to focus on speaking skills in class. Reading might be perceived as less interesting or a less effective use of class time. So sometimes it can get shunted and moved outside of the class and done as a solitary activity without as much support as some of the other skills work that we focus on in the classroom. Okay, this seems to be an issue for a lot of teachers, motivating learners who don't read much in their own language. And it's also really important here that we think about why they don't read much in their own language. There could be a number of reasons behind that. It might be challenging to find interesting texts and materials. And we will also often have to support a range of reading abilities. We might have learners with different reading abilities, and they might read at different speeds. So teachers will need to be ready for early finishes. Now, as we go through today's session, I'd really like for you to share your solutions to these challenges in the chat. Now, I'm sure that between all of us, we'll have lots of experiences and lots of ideas to share. So I'd love to see those from you, and I'll be sprinkling in a few suggestions as well. Okay, so let's next look at some of the characteristics of good learners. Sorry, good readers. If you're an English teacher, there's a fair chance that you yourself are a good reader. I'd also like you to think of people you know who you consider to be good readers as well. Maybe they are learners in your class, maybe they're family members or friends. But tell me in the chat, what do they do or what do they think that makes them good readers? Okay. So Sanjeev says, read, read, read. So obviously lots of practice. Marina mentions extensive reading. Um, Elnaz mentions awareness of the aim of reading. So I think that's a really important point. Maybe having a purpose for reading, and maybe also thinking about the purpose of the text that is being read. Okay. Rashana suggests running a DEAR program, which stands for Dear, Drop Everything and Read. Um, that's not something I've heard of before, but I love the sound of it. Um, Being open to diverse reading, simply reading a lot. And Fatima Salah mentions using different reading techniques. Okay, so many ideas there. Please keep them coming in. I'd like to share um, some characteristics that I've picked out. This isn't an exhaustive list. You will be able to add to it, but I think 6 useful characteristics for us to focus on today are good readers read a wide range of things. So it's not just reading a lot, but it's reading lots of different things, different text types, as well as obviously reading regularly, very frequently. As Fatima mentions, using different reading skills. Now, perhaps can you tell me in the chat? Can you suggest some reading skills? So, what different reading skills are there? What might we do differently when first picking up a newspaper as opposed to maybe looking through a timetable? Okay, so we've got lots of stuff here: skimming, scanning, inferring meaning from context. Okay, decoding, reading carefully, extensive reading. So much there. Okay, picking out main ideas from texts, reading between the lines. So yeah, so inferring meaning. Wonderful. Okay, one of those reading skills, which you've already mentioned, is kind of dealing with unknown vocabulary, and I've given it its own little circle here because it's such a key one, especially for many of the learners in the context of the activities we'll be looking at today. Good readers record and reuse new vocabulary. So this this point sort of bridges the gap between our passive or receptive vocabularies and what we might understand when we see it written down in the text and what we're able to produce ourselves when speaking or writing, productive vocabularies. And good readers also reflect upon what they read. It's not that they just finish it and close the book or turn off the screen and walk away. They keep thinking about it. And that's something we're certainly going to be looking at today. Now, the big question is, can teachers influence these characteristics? Do you think they are things that are just innate within our learners? Are they born with them? Or are these things that teachers can influence? Yes or no? Okay, so that's a big yes from everyone out there. Of course, lots of exclamation marks. I totally agree. Yes, we can, and we should. We can do this by providing opportunities, time, encouragement, and support to get students doing these things. We can do that through the materials we use in class, the reading assignments we set learners, the encouragement and interest that we show in learners' reading habits, as well as the space that we provide in lessons to share their reading habits and interests with others. It might seem like maybe quite a silly little thing, but by getting students and giving them the space to discuss their reading habits and what they're interested in. That helps establish more of a culture of reading in the classroom. There's also lots of things that I'm sure we already do, especially on exam focused tasks. So things like thinking about the specific reading skills that are used in specific tasks, like highlighting strategies for dealing with new words, as well as giving learners time to record new vocabulary and opportunities to reuse it themselves. So remember, these are all things that we can do, and they make a real difference, and they together combined make make people good readers. So we shouldn't just look at the people coming into our classrooms and thinking, well, he's, that one's a good reader, that one isn't. These are things that we can and we should influence, and we can help our learners by doing so. So let's look at some classroom activities that can actually help develop some of these skills, skills and knowledge. Now, we'll look at a number of different activities today. These first ones are taken from the A2 Key for Schools Guides for Teacher. We'll be looking at the B1 Preliminary for Schools guide a little later. The guides look like this, and each comes with a separate booklet containing all the handouts you'll need to do all the activities you see today in class. So on the left, there's one from the A2 Key for Schools. On the right, B1 Preliminary for Schools. They all come as PDFs, so you can print them out, get people drawing all over them, cutting them up, adapting them however you like. They also come as PDFs, so as they come as PDFs, they can also be viewed maybe on your classroom screen or on learners' own devices. I'll be showing you where you can get all of these guides and resources at the end of the sessions. Okay, there's Belzad asks the question. There is a question. If they don't read in their own language, how should we motivate them to read? I'd like to come back to that question a little bit later. How can we motivate people to read? Okay, let's stick a pin in that one. Okay, now, our first activity. I'd like to get you thinking about what learners need to know about a text, especially before they choose whether to read it more carefully. So please tell me in the chat, what is it helpful for learners to know about a text? Okay, so the context, the type of texts, the general idea, the level, main ideas, the setting, vocabulary. Someone just mentioned author. Yeah. Okay, I think we've got most of my ideas there. So for me, I think 4 really important points which you've mentioned are the text type. So for example, is it a notice? Is it an email? Is it a recipe? Is it a novel, a poem? What is it? Who is the intended audience? Who is it written for? And who is it written by? What is the purpose of the text? Is it written to entertain, to provide information, to make an arrangement, to persuade? Knowing the answers to these questions helps learners to read more efficiently. It helps them to anticipate where useful information is likely to be, and it helps them predict what is likely to be in there. It helps them make better guesses about what the text is likely to contain, the kind of words that are used, and the information within. And having a better understanding of all of this helps reading comprehension. Okay. I've just seen someone sort of mention that knowing the author isn't as important as the subject. Now, I think it's important to think about why these points are important. And admittedly, their importance might vary according to the task and the type of text, but we'll be looking at the author and the audience of a couple of texts in a moment, and I'd like you to think about how that helps your global understanding of the text. So, I'm going to show you a text, but you're only going to see it for a few seconds. And I want to see if you can answer these 4 questions. We'll put the questions up here just to help us remember them. So, what text type? Who was it written for? Who wrote it? And why? Okay. Are you ready for your first text? Okay. Now, here we go. Okay, was that quite fast? It was quite fast. Okay. So, I'd love to hear your answers. What kind of text was that? Yep, so I've got people saying it's giving advice, it's informative. Web. Okay, yeah, it's a web page. It's actually a Cambridge English web page. So a web page that's giving information. People have picked that out. Yep. Lots of people have written that it's for teachers and it's written by Cambridge. I'll let you have another very quick look. Okay, so I think that was up on your screen for maybe about 3 seconds or so. And in those 3 seconds, you were able to identify a huge amount of information. Now, knowing the knowing who wrote it and who it's written for helps you make lots of predictions about what will exist within the text and what might come later as well. Let's see if we can do the same thing with another text, different one. Okay, so it's a text message. Yeah, who was it written for? And who was it written by? Okay, so people are saying it's written for a dad, father, written by the child. Yeah, written by a child to the parents. And why? What was the purpose? To inform, to give some information about an arrangement. Maybe to ask permission. Maybe that was sort of hidden away there. Maybe that was implied. Okay, great. We're going to do it with one final text. Same thing. Okay, so again, that was just for a couple of seconds. So tell me, what was the text type? Was it for, from, and the purpose? Okay, just so many suggestions. I haven't seen one that I disagree with yet. So it's an announcement or a notice. It's from the sort of school, so from a sort of school organization itself to students. And it's information about books and payments or something, price. So we don't need to know all the details, but knowing those 4 bits of information is really helpful. Now, if you're doing this with your students, then it might be helpful to give them some suggestions beforehand about how to read that text. If they start at the beginning and they start trying to read every word until the text disappears, they will not be able to successfully complete the task. It's helpful to think about what you do with your eyes during that kind of activity. So, your eyes sort of move quite quickly across the text. You don't try and take in every single word. You will look around it in general and think about the overall layout. If there are headings, you will look at the headings. If there's a picture with a sort of caption, you might look at that. You'll usually look at the very beginning and right at the end. If there are topic sentences, then your eyes might go to those as well, and your eyes may try and pick out any sort of words, sort of that are linked by a common topic or theme. And those are ways that we get a lot of information from a text in just a few seconds. Now, that is skimming. And that skimming stage is just part of an activity suggested by the A2 Key for Schools Teachers Guides to Reading Skills. So that's the first bit there, which kicks off with skimming. After that, it suggests referring learners to the rubric and task options and getting them to highlight key information. We'll look at that in a moment. They'll then go and scan the text. So they'll be reading the text again, but in a different way. They'll be trying to find key information from the rubric within the text. And finally, we'll get learners to speak with their partners and try and explain why answers are correct or incorrect. So we'll get them justifying their ideas. Now, as well as helping learners develop their skimming and scanning skills, this also provides them with a really good way of approaching the Part 1 reading paper. You can get them to practice this with sample papers, which you can get from the Cambridge English website, but you could also use this approach with texts that you or your learners can bring into your classroom. Now, a question that was asked earlier was just how can you motivate learners to read who don't normally read in their own language, in their first language? And that can be for a number of different reasons. One of them might be interest. They might not really care about the topics that are represented in the texts they work with. If that's the case, then it can be helpful to task learners with finding and bringing in things that they are interested in and incorporating those within your lessons. Yeah, it sounds like a few of the other people here are suggesting similar things. Yeah, making learners curious about texts. Yeah, finding students' own interests. Okay, and maybe handing over a little bit of control is a good way of doing that. Instead of the teacher always bringing all the texts and dictating exactly what will be read in the lesson, hand over some control to students. Maybe ask them to bring in a certain kind of text, but let them choose the topic for the next lesson and work with that. Okay, now I digress. Let's reflect upon the activity we've just done. In particular, the reading skills we used. So tell me, what reading skills were used in the activity? Yeah, okay, so we've got skimming and scanning in there in particular. Can you tell me when we skim? And what does it help us do? What is the purpose of skimming? Okay, so as many people are saying, so yeah, you skim first, you do it to get a general idea of the text, to get more of a sort of global understanding. Okay, next, how do you skim? And this is maybe more of a challenging question, and it's one that we often don't address in the classroom, and it's really important that we do. Okay, so people have mentioned look at the title, look at subheadings, look for commonly repeating sort of words or themes, look at the layout. Don't look at every word. Excellent. So yeah, these are all things which, when put together, will help our learners skim a text, get a general understanding of the meaning, and that can aid their comprehension overall. Okay, now this activity we're doing now, I'd continue it and do it with scanning. When do we scan? Why? How do you scan? Um, I'm not going to go through your answers for this one, but this is a stage that I use with learners after reading activities. I encourage them to overtly think about the reading skills they use, why we used them, what it helped them achieve, and how they did that. If you're doing this with learners for the first time, then I would certainly prompt them, and I'd also give them this information before the task. I might try and demonstrate it a little bit. I might try and get this information from them by asking questions. But it's really important learners are aware of what these skills involve, how to do them, why they should do them, and what they can help them do. Okay, getting learners to reflect on these skills and these strategies um, helps them notice them more when they're reading independently. That can make them a little bit more autonomous and less reliant on you, their teacher. Now, in order to really help learners demonstrate their reading skills to their full extent in exam tasks, it helps for learners to be familiar with the tasks themselves. So let's now look at an example of a familiarization task. So here's an example of a reading part 1 question from the A2 Key for Schools exam. If seeing the text for the first time, I would use the skimming activity that we just used to provide important information about the text. The next thing I would do is I would get learners to tell me what they need to do. What does the task involve? I mean, I could tell them, but I think I would learn more about their current levels of understanding if I got them to tell me. So I'd ask my students to look at this task with a partner, and then I'd nominate some people to tell me what the task involves. So please, oh, I can see everyone's jumping in and doing the task straight away. What a bunch of teachers you really are. Yeah, it's quite a natural thing to do, isn't it? But what I want to know is, what is the task? What are you being asked to do in this activity? That is what I would ask my students to tell me. Yep, and the answer is that students need to identify the correct option from a selection. There is only one correct option, not. Now, the next thing I would do is get learners to highlight key information in the rubric. I get them to highlight who is mentioned and the key actions. So the criteria that they need to find within the text that is mentioned in the individual options. So I won't get all your answers and suggestions for that in the chat, but this is what I would do in class. Yeah, I would encourage learners to do this individually, have a think individually, compare the partner, then maybe we would check as a class. And then once they've identified these key bits, key details, key bits of information within the options, next I would get them to scan the text and try and find evidence for these points within the main text. Now, before doing this, I would remind learners that they are looking for the same information, but it won't necessarily be exactly the same words. There's very likely to be some use of synonyms, maybe negated antonyms. So the information with the options will be presented in a slightly different way in the text, but with the same meaning. So I can see that everybody has pretty much got the right answer there very, very quickly. Now, the important thing that we really need to focus our learners on, because they will automatically, when they see a text like this, they will give their answers. And they'll say, teacher, it's C or A or B. And it could be very tempting to say, correct. Okay, let's move on. I think it's more helpful, though, at this stage to slow down and focus learners on justifying their reasons for their answers. There's a lot of potential learning there. Okay, so I'd like you to tell me in the chat why option A is incorrect. Why is option A incorrect? Okay, it's talking about all students, but actually we're only looking for some students. Students only pay if they lose their book. Why is option B incorrect? I would ask my students. There is no mention of a change of book, and everyone's already far, far ahead of me. I can see you've already given your explanations, your justifications for option C being correct. So there's some use of if you lose yours, if you cannot find. It's a conditional thing. It's not for all students, just those who have lost their books. So we can see that this exam task also involves an understanding of synonyms. You'll find lots of activities within the teacher's guide that provide specific practice of working with synonyms and antonyms, which you might find useful to use at this stage. Sorry, I forgot your name, but I saw someone suggest in the chat at this point, instead of giving students the questions, or if it's giving students the options, getting them to come up with a couple of options. So getting them to suggest two distractors and a correct option. And I think that's a really, really nice way of getting students more actively involved and engaging with the text, while also giving you, the teacher, a really good view of their understanding of the text. Okay. So, do you have any questions about these activities? If you do, please ask them in the Q&A box. As you do that, I've also got a few questions for you. So, how does the activity focus on specific skills? Do these activities test or develop reading and language skills? And how could they be adapted? Okay, so I'll let you think about those for a moment. Meanwhile, let me see if I can find some questions. Okay. Oh, I'm afraid that bit's not working for me at the moment. So I'm going to say I'll talk you through some of my answers to these questions. So, how does the activity focus learners on specific skills? Okay, well, firstly, through task design, by giving you a very limited time to look at that text. You were not able to read it carefully, to read it for detail by looking at every word. The way the task was designed, you had to skim it in order to successfully complete the task. I also prompted you to overtly consider, to really think about the reading skills you were using. So those were two ways that I focused you on specific skills. Now, do they test or develop reading and language skills? I would argue that they develop skills. That was achieved by walking learners through them step by step, by allowing students to get ideas from other learners. That provides them with further support, by giving them multiple opportunities to justify their answers after doing so with others. That gives them repeated opportunities. They were given feedback from peers, but also the teacher that focuses on the reasons for the answers, not just saying whether they were correct or not. And doing those things should leave learners more able to do that task again in the future. If students will be better able to do it as a result of your learning activity, then I would argue that it is a developmental task rather than one that only tests their ability to do it. Okay, and how could they be adapted? Well, you could work with different texts, as we spoke about. We could use, we could give them different lengths of time. This could be done with paper and pen. It could be printed out. You could do it on digital devices. You could think about pairings for people that work together, and also the sizes of pairs or groups. So lots of different ways in which you can adapt that activity. Okay, now our next activity is taken from the B1 Preliminary for Schools Reading Part 2 Teacher Guide. Snappy title there. Now, again, you should be able to take some of the ideas from this task, from this activity, and apply them to other texts, other levels, and other parts of the exam. Okay, so let's have a look. This will start with a task familiarization activity. So again, let's have a very quick look at the text. If we're having a quick look at the text, can you remember the 4 questions you will need to answer? Yes, they are. What is the text type? Who is it for? Who is it by? And what is the purpose of the text? Why was it written? So, who for text type purpose? Julian Bailey, excellent. You've got it. Right, so I'm going to show you a text. So remember, I would cast my eye towards any titles, subheadings, maybe look for commonly occurring words or themes within the text, maybe look first sentence, maybe the last, and don't try and read every word. Right, let's go. That was fast, wasn't it? What a What a mean man I am. But that's all the time you've got. So please tell me, what are the answers to my 4 questions? Okay, so people saying it's some kind of brochure for tourists, information thing for tourists. Yeah, I think it's kind of a guidebook thing. It's maybe informative. Maybe it's trying to persuade people where to go within a town. Me, I think it's giving information. It's for tourists, maybe by a tourist board. Okay, excellent. You got that in a few seconds, lots of words. I think your students could do this if you gave them a little bit more time, but not so much time they could read it and read every word. It's important you don't do that, or they will. Okay, now we've got an idea of a kind of text we're dealing with. Let's focus on the task. So here's the task. Now, please don't do the task, but tell me in the chat, what is the task? Paraphrase it, summarize it for me. What do learners need to do? Okay, so matching, scanning, people are saying. Sorry, I missed your name, but someone wrote identify or recommend the most appropriate selection. Yeah, that's absolutely it. So this involves identifying key criteria within the text and then searching for them in a series of other texts with the aim of finding the best match. Okay, so please tell me, looking at the first text, the one with a little picture just next to it, how many criteria are there? How many things are we going to be looking for? Okay, Kenneth, Maria. Yep, you've got it. 3 things. And they are discovering how children played in the past. The kids are interested in that. Visiting a historical building and spending time in the open air. So we're looking for 3 bits of information. So it's always important before we dive into the main text and start reading that really carefully that we really spend time analyzing the question and identifying the key information within it. Okay, so then we'll get that information and we'll put that to one side so we can see it and we can refer to it while we are scanning the guidebook entries. And that's what we'll do now. We'll get students to scan the guidebook entries and try and find how many instances of the criteria they find within each. Okay, now if I were doing this with a smaller class, if I was doing this with an online smaller class, I might use something like Google Jamboard, and then we would all be able to annotate the screen. It doesn't quite work in a webinar with several thousand people, so we'll just have to talk through this section. But yeah, I would get students to individually scan through and identify instances of these criteria within the texts. So they both contain examples they both contain things that the children might enjoy doing. There's references to old stuff, buildings. So perhaps there are instances of historical buildings in both. And spending time in the open air, being outdoors, that's only in Glaze House. Okay. Oh, and actually, if we look carefully, the second criteria, visiting a historical building, Actually, I don't think the museum at O'Farrell's is a historical building. We don't know that it's an old building. It's a building that contains old things, which is slightly different. Okay, so it's important to bear in mind. Yeah, Maria, the museum isn't a historical building. You're absolutely right. So it's important to be on the lookout for distractors, things that are designed to catch our students out and to focus them on them so they don't just scan to something that looks like the criteria and stop and just assume that they've got it. Okay, so bearing all of these things in mind, tell me, where should Yuki and family go? O'Farrell's or Glaze House? Okay, everyone, thankfully, everyone's onto it with Glaze House, and it's very clear to see. I mean, I think you would have got this anyway, but if you were in any doubt, and especially the case for your students, going through this process can really, really help people to see not just what the correct answer is, but the reason for it with reference to the text. At each stage of this, I would get students to attempt this individually, check their answers with a partner before we do that as a whole class. So there's lots of back and forth, there's lots of repeated opportunities to go through this process. Okay, so now having done that, learners should be very familiar with that exam task. They should know what's expected of them and how to complete it. Now, we're not quite finished yet. We could get learners to reflect upon the reading skills that they would need to use when completing that task, as we did before. For the interests of time, we're not going to do that now. So we're going to skip over that stage. But remember, the one we did before, you could do that here. Instead, we'll do something that focuses learners on the actual process of completing that task. So, can you tell me, what do you think is the missing word in sentence 1? Okay, yeah, so first we skimmed the text. We skimmed the text, and then I might prompt them to say, why did you skim it? To get a general understanding of it. And then number 2, read the rubric carefully. Excellent. You're all one step ahead of me in the chat. This is wonderful. Number 3, identify and highlight key details. 4, scan for and highlight key details in the main text. And then finally, choose the best option. Now, if you just give the task to students and say, off you go, then I think they will automatically, the stronger learners in your class, might just get straight to choosing the best option. They'll stick their hand up and say, teacher, answer C. And then if you're like, yes, if you confirm that's the correct answer, then the whole class moves on. They know what the correct answer is, but many students won't know why. So they won't be more able to do these kind of tasks themselves in future. And you won't understand who might need a little bit more support and where they might need that support. So those steps can be really, really helpful for you and your learners. Okay, now I've got one eye on the clock. So please do add your questions to the Q&A box. We'll come to those at the end if we have time. But a few important points I wanted to highlight are how learners are supported. So they are walked through the process step by step. They get to see how the answers are arrived at. We highlight and annotate the text. Doing that creates a record to refer back to. That lessens the cognitive load upon learners. That's really helpful for people who might have challenges with working memory, but it's just good for everyone, really. If you don't have to remember the 3 criteria, because you can just see the highlighted 3 criteria on one side, then you're more able to concentrate on scanning and finding them within the main text and developing your reading skills, which is what this should be all about, rather than sort of testing memory. Doing all of this creates a visual record of a process that would otherwise only exist in learners' heads, and this helps us understand where learners are getting confused and helps us sort of focus any remedial or follow-up activity. I'd say this helps develop reading skills and exam strategies. We signpost the skills learners need to use. We explain what they involve and give repeated opportunities to use them. We get them to reflect upon them. However, it's also done in the context of an exam task, which should help them do them more confidently in the future. We could adapt this. As I said, if doing it with an online course, if doing it with an online class, I might use a collaborative whiteboard, something like a Google Jamboard, which allows various members of the class to actively participate and to annotate. Learners could do this individually using PDF documents on their own devices. So if doing this in a face-to-face classroom, you could cut up the texts, stick them around the classroom, and get people moving around. If you feel a bit of movement would energize learners at any stage of your class. Okay, so there are a whole load of different activities which also support learners, not just with language, developing language skills, but also focusing on things, sort of features of discourse, like cohesion, or activities like this, which focus learners on synonyms, antonyms, so helping them with vocabulary. There's ones here that might help with things like multi-word verbs through sort of communicative class surveys. So there's a whole load of different activities in there. Okay. Now, I think we're going to leap ahead at this stage because we've summarized a lot of these sort of main points already. And I'd like to quickly show you where you can get all of this good stuff. So let's get ahead to resources and tools. So to download these booklets, first go to cambridgeenglish.org. Then when you get to the site, tap on Teaching English in the top menu, and then select Resources for Teachers. Swipe or scroll down the next screen until you see this search tool. Choose the level you're interested in, and then select Teacher Guides from the resource type. Hit search, and then look down the screen, and a couple of options should appear. Tap on the little plus signs, and the boxes will expand out. Finally, you should see somewhere in that list the teacher's guides. So this one is called A2 Key for Schools, Teacher's Guides to Developing Reading Skills. Tap on that and it will download to your device. Once there, you can choose whether to save it, bookmark it so you can find it really sort of quickly next time. Remember, these guides all contain a task familiarization and activity for every part of the reading paper. Now, there's going to be some more reading guides out very soon, and from early July, there'll be guides for B2 first for schools, C1 advanced, and also C2 proficiency. So there's one for every level there. If that's not enough for you, then get yourself to one of those guides, flip straight to the final page, and you will find a load of links to extra resources that will help you and your learners develop their reading skills. Okay, so thank you so much for all of your active participation throughout this session. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. I'm not sure if we have time for a quick question or two. So I'm not sure if Kate is going to join me here. I'll see if I can bring some questions up. Okay, so we've got a few people asking about how do we motivate those who do not like reading. I think that's a really, really important question, and one that we posed at the beginning. So I think considering the materials and topics that you use, try and find stuff that your learners are into. You can only do that if you know what they're into. So find time in your classes to learn about your learners' interests.